The ache in my lower back was a familiar companion, a dull throb that set the rhythm for my days. Each step up, each turn of the key in a community mailbox, each heave of the canvas sack over my shoulder, it was all scored to that same, tired beat. My life had become a series of straight lines and right angles. The grid of the city streets, the sharp corners of cardboard boxes, the rigid columns of names on a delivery roster. I moved through these lines, a ghost in a blue uniform, noticed only when a package was late or a signature was required. It was a life ordered for safety, for the simple, unassailable logic of getting from point A to point B, and it was grinding me down into dust. Most of the buildings on my route were anonymous brick boxes, their lobbies smelling faintly of stale air and disinfectant. But then there was the Vance Tower. It was a spear of glass and steel that seemed to scrape the clouds, a place so clean and quiet it felt like a cathedral to money. The air inside was different, cool, still, and scented with something I couldn't name, something like clean linen and distant rain. Delivering here was the one part of my day that felt like stepping into another world, a world where backs did not ache and the future was not a terrifying, formless void. My connection to that world was tenuous, a name on a shipping label, Arthur Vance, Penthouse. Almost every day, there was something for him. A slim leather folio, a heavy box from an auction house, a tube that surely held architectural plans. I never saw him. The packages were left with the concierge, a man whose suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. But I saw his name, and in the quiet moments on my route, I would imagine the life that went with it. A life of clean lines, yes, but lines drawn by choice, not by necessity. I had one small, secret token from that life. Months ago, a high-end catalog for bespoke furniture had been misdelivered to my own building, addressed to him. By the time I noticed the error, it was rain-spotted and the corner was bent. I couldn't, in good conscience, deliver it in that state, and I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. So it sat on my small, wobbly kitchen table, a silent testament to a world of handcrafted walnut and brushed steel, a world so far from my own particle board reality. Sometimes, I would trace the lines of a chair with my finger and imagine the man who might sit in it. That day, the ache was worse than usual. A relentless drizzle had soaked through my jacket, and the strap of my bag dug into my shoulder with a vengeance. The Vance Tower was my last stop, a final ascent before I could collapse in my own cramped apartment. There were two packages for the penthouse. One was a small, dense box, the other a flat, rigid mailer. The concierge, Mr. Harris, was on the phone, and he gave me a curt nod, gesturing toward the private elevator that serviced the top floors. It was unusual, but not unheard of. Sometimes, for security, they preferred a direct handoff. The elevator ride was a silent, smooth glide that made my ears pop. It opened directly into a small, private vestibule, a space of cool marble and soft, indirect light. There were two doors. One was marked PHA, the other PHB. My manifest simply said penthouse. I hesitated. A 50-50 chance. I chose the one on the left, PHA, and pressed the bell. I could hear nothing from within, no footsteps, no sound at all. I waited, the weight of the packages seeming to grow heavier with each passing second. Nothing. A flicker of annoyance went through me. Of course. The one day I have to do this, and no one is home. I turned, ready to leave the packages, and that's when the other door, PHB, opened. I stopped, my hand hovering over the small marble bench. The man who stood there was exactly as I had not pictured him. I had imagined someone sharp, severe, a man made of the same glass and steel as his building. This man was solid, grounded. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s or early 50s, with silvering temples and a face that was calm and composed. He wore a simple gray sweater and dark trousers, and his feet were bare on the marble floor. He looked at me, then at the packages in my hand, then at the door I had just been standing in front of. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was gentle, a little bit tired, and deeply amused. "You're on the wrong floor," he said. His voice was low and warm, like aged whiskey. It didn't carry the sharp echo of the marble vestibule. It seemed to absorb the sound. Confusion washed over me. "This is the penthouse level," I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison. "The manifest just said penthouse, It is, he agreed, stepping forward. But this is my private entrance. That floor, he gestured with his chin toward the elevator, is for deliveries. He took another step, closing the distance between us. He was taller than I'd expected. I could smell the faint, clean scent I always associated with the lobby. But on him, it was warmer, mixed with the scent of paper and something else, something uniquely his. I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck. I was the delivery guy who couldn't even find the right door. A new level of incompetence. I'm sorry, I mumbled, shifting the packages. The concierge just waved me up. I'll take these back down. As I turned to go, his hand shot out, not grabbing, but simply closing around my wrist. His touch was startling. His skin was warm, his grip firm but not confining. It was a gesture of pause, not of control. I froze, my gaze dropping to his hand, the long, capable fingers resting against my pulse. I could feel the steady beat of my own heart, suddenly frantic, against his calm hold. The weight of his gaze was a physical presence. No need for that, he said, his voice still quiet, still warm. His eyes, a deep, thoughtful gray, met mine. The smile was still there, a little wider now. You have the right address now. He gently tugged my wrist, leading me a single step toward his open door. Come on. It's no trouble. The moment hung in the air, suspended. My wrist in his hand, his quiet invitation, the open doorway to a life I had only ever imagined. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt seen. Truly seen. The ghost in the blue uniform suddenly had substance, held in place by the startling, unexpected warmth of a stranger's hand. I followed him inside. The apartment wasn't a sterile gallery of wealth as I might have expected. It was a home. Bookshelves lined an entire wall, filled to bursting. The furniture was a mix of modern clean lines and worn, comfortable-looking antiques. A drafting table stood near a massive window that overlooked the entire city, papers and sketches held down with smooth river stones. It was a space that was lived in, a space of quiet competence and deep comfort. He led me to a simple, elegant console table just inside the door. You can leave them there, he said, finally releasing my wrist. The skin where he had held me tingled, suddenly cool in the conditioned air. I placed the packages on the table, my movements stiff and clumsy. I was intensely aware of him standing nearby, his quiet presence filling the space. He wasn't watching me with scrutiny, but with a kind of placid observation, like he was genuinely curious. Thank you, he said. It was a simple phrase, but the way he said it felt different. It wasn't the dismissive thanks I usually received. It was direct, personal. He was thanking me, Leo, not the uniform I wore. It's my job, I said, the automatic, self-effacing response falling from my lips before I could stop it. He tilted his head slightly, and his gray eyes seemed to assess me more deeply. Still, you saved me a trip downstairs. It's appreciated. He gestured toward the vast expanse of the apartment. Can I offer you a glass of water? You look like you've been through the ringer with this weather. The offer was so simple, so normal, yet it felt monumental. No one ever offered me water. I was a function, a service, a brief interruption in their day. To be invited, even for a moment, to be a person inside these walls, it was disorienting. I have to get back, I stammered, my hand instinctively going to the strap of my empty mailbag. More stops a lie. He was my last stop. He knew it was a lie. I could see it in the way his expression didn't change, the way he simply accepted my refusal without challenge. Of course, he said. Well, thank you again, Leo. He used my name. It was on my uniform, embroidered in blue thread over my heart, but people rarely used it. Hearing it in his low, calm voice was another small shock. He had noticed. He had read my name. He walked me back to the vestibule, standing in his doorway as I pressed the button for the elevator. As the door slid open, our eyes met one last time. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, something I couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't just politeness. It was recognition. The ride down was the opposite of the ride up. My ears felt plugged, my body felt heavy, and the cool, sterile air of the elevator felt suffocating. Back in the main lobby, Mr. Harris gave me an inquisitive look. I just nodded and pushed my way out into the rain, the drizzle feeling like a welcome shock of reality against my hot skin. The entire encounter couldn't have lasted more than 5 minutes, but it had completely unmoored me. The steady, Predictable lines of my day had been irrevocably bent. For the rest of the week, my route felt different. The Vance Tower loomed at the end of it, a question mark on the skyline. Every time I collected a package addressed to Arthur Vance, my stomach did a slow, nervous flip. I rehearsed what I would say if I saw him again. A polite nod. A professional greeting. Nothing that would betray the absurdly profound effect his simple gesture of kindness had on me. But I didn't see him. The packages went back to being left with the concierge. The private elevator remained a distant, gleaming promise. Life snapped back to its rigid grid, and the encounter began to feel like a dream, a strange, warm anomaly in the cold, gray routine of my existence. The only proof it had happened was the lingering phantom sensation of his hand on my wrist, a warmth I could summon just by closing my eyes. Then, about 2 weeks later, I was in the lobby sorting the mail for the entire building into their respective slots. It was a tedious task, one I usually did on autopilot. I was so focused on the small, numbered boxes that I didn't hear him approach. "Good morning, Leo." The voice was unmistakable. I straightened up so fast I nearly dropped a handful of letters. Arthur Vance was standing a few feet away, holding a leather briefcase. He was dressed for business now, in a perfectly tailored dark suit that made him look even more imposing, yet his demeanor was just as calm and approachable as it had been in his apartment. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice a little tight. "Good morning." "Arthur, please," he corrected gently. He glanced at the mountain of mail I was sorting. "Looks like a busy day. They're all busy," I replied, trying for a light, casual tone and failing completely. I sounded like I was reporting for duty. He gave a small nod, his eyes lingering on my hands as I slotted an envelope into its place. I suddenly felt clumsy, my fingers thick and slow. I was used to being invisible while I did this job, and his focused attention was like a spotlight. He wasn't saying anything, just watching, and the silence stretched, filled only by the soft rustle of paper. I found myself hyper-aware of everything. The hum of the building's ventilation, the distant sound of traffic outside, the steady, quiet rhythm of his breathing. I started to wonder what he was thinking. Was he just being polite? Was this some kind of rich man's curiosity, a brief observation of the working class before he went off to his world of boardrooms and stock prices? The thought sent a familiar chill of cynicism through me. It was safer to believe that, safer than entertaining the ridiculous notion that his interest was genuine. He shifted his weight, the fine leather of his shoes making a soft sound on the polished floor. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, breaking the silence. "It was a busy day, and you saved me a genuine hassle." "It was nothing," I said, still fumbling with the mail, my gaze fixed on the brass mail slots. I couldn't look at him. "It wasn't nothing to me," he countered, his tone firm but gentle. There was another pause. I risked a quick glance up at him. He was looking at me with that same, unnerving directness, his expression unreadable but intent. It felt like he could see right through the uniform, right through the practiced neutrality, and into the mess of exhaustion and yearning that I kept so carefully hidden. The weight of his gaze was a tangible thing, a pressure that made the air feel thick. Then, just as Mr. Harris came bustling out of his office, Arthur did something that sent a jolt through my entire system. He reached out and placed his hand briefly on my shoulder. It was a fleeting touch, just a light squeeze, over in a second. But it was deliberate. It wasn't an accidental brush. It was a gesture of connection, of reassurance. It said, "I see you. This is real. Have a good day, Leo," he said. And then he was gone, walking with a smooth, unhurried stride toward the gleaming revolving doors. I stood there for a long moment, my hand frozen in midair, a letter to apartment 12B clutched in my fingers. The spot on my shoulder where he had touched me burned with a warmth that spread down my arm and settled deep in my chest. It was a simple, platonic gesture, the kind of thing people did all the time. But between us, with the vast, unspoken gulf of wealth and status that separated us, it felt like a seismic event. It was a touch that carried 1,000 ambiguous meanings, and I knew, with a sinking, thrilling certainty, that I would spend the rest of the day analyzing every single one of them. The touch became a new focal point for my obsession. It was more potent than the memory of his hand on my wrist, because it had happened out here, in the semi-public space of the lobby. It felt less like a fluke and more like a statement, though I had no idea what the statement was. Was it simple appreciation? A patronizing pat on the back for the helpful little delivery man? Or was it something else? I replayed the moment in my mind, dissecting it from every angle. The pressure of his fingers, the brief warmth through the thin fabric of my shirt, the way he had met my eyes just before he did it. There was a restraint in the touch, a carefulness that seemed at odds with a casual gesture. It wasn't the hearty, backslapping touch of an old friend. It was measured, considered, like everything else about him. My days settled into a new routine, one punctuated by the possibility of seeing him. I started taking more care with my appearance, making sure my uniform was clean and pressed, that my hair was neatly combed. It was ridiculous. I was a mail carrier. But the thought of him seeing me looking as tired and rumpled as I felt was suddenly unbearable. I was living for these brief, charged encounters, these fleeting moments of being seen by Arthur Vance. We fell into a pattern of small talk. If he saw me in the lobby, he would stop and ask how my day was going. He learned my route ended with his building and would sometimes comment on it. "Making your way to the top, Leo?" he'd ask, a gentle teasing glint in his eye that made my stomach flutter. The banter was light, almost meaningless on the surface, but underneath it, I felt a current of something deeper. A mutual curiosity, a shared acknowledgement that these brief conversations were becoming important to both of us. One afternoon, a huge, flat-packed crate was delivered for him. It was at least 7 feet tall and incredibly awkward. The building's dolly was broken, and the maintenance staff were dealing with a leak on one of the lower floors. Mr. Harris was flapping his hands, completely flustered. "It can't just sit here," he fretted, gesturing at the massive object taking up a significant portion of his pristine lobby. I had just finished my deliveries and was about to leave when Arthur himself came down. He took in the scene with his usual calm, his gaze sweeping over the crate, the stressed-out concierge, and finally me. "There's a problem?" he asked, his voice cutting cleanly through Mr. Harris's anxious chatter. "Mr. Vance, my apologies. The delivery company just left this. The dolly is out of commission, and I have no one to help me move it to the service elevator," the concierge explained, wringing his hands. Arthur looked at the crate again, then back at me. I could feel the question before he asked it. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was a chance, a door opening. "Leo," he said, his tone even and direct. "I know you're off the clock, but would you be willing to help me with this? I would, of course, compensate you for your time." The offer was perfect. It wasn't a demand or an assumption. It was a business proposition, clean and ethical. It respected my time and my agency. It gave me a choice. "Of course," I said, maybe a little too quickly. "I can help." Getting the crate into the service elevator was a challenge. It required us to work together, to coordinate our movements in the tight space. "Okay, on 3, we lift and pivot," he'd say, his voice low and steady right beside my ear. I was acutely aware of his physical presence, the strength in his arms as he took the heavier side, the way our shoulders brushed as we maneuvered a difficult corner. We weren't a billionaire and a mail carrier anymore. We were just 2 men trying to move a heavy, awkward object. We were, for a few minutes, equals. We got it up to his apartment and leaned it against the wall in the entryway. I was breathing a little heavily, my back protesting the unusual strain. Arthur looked completely unruffled, though a thin sheen of perspiration glistened on his temples. "I can't thank you enough," he said, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing his forehead. "I don't know what I would have done." He walked over to a sleek, minimalist bar cart. "Now, I believe I offered you water last time. Can I tempt you with something stronger today? Or at least a coffee? I'll make a decent pour-over this time." I didn't refuse. "Coffee sounds great," I said. He nodded, pleased, and set about preparing it with a quiet, focused precision that I was beginning to recognize as his signature trait. As he worked, grinding the beans, heating the water, I took the opportunity to really look at his home. From the entryway, I'd only gotten a glimpse. Now, I could see the details. The art on the walls wasn't just decoration. It was chosen with a discerning eye. There were architectural sketches, abstract paintings, and a stunning series of black and white photographs. His space was a reflection of him, ordered, thoughtful, and with a deep, underlying warmth that you could only see if you paid attention. "Your home is beautiful," I said, the words coming out before I could second-guess them. He looked up from the coffee, a genuine smile lighting up his features. It transformed his face, softening the serious lines around his eyes. Thank you. It's my sanctuary. He poured the hot water over the grounds in a slow, steady spiral. It's taken a long time to feel like one. The admission was unexpected. It was a small crack in his composed facade, a hint of a history I knew nothing about. It was a moment of vulnerability, and it felt like a gift. He brought 2 mugs of coffee over to a small seating area by the window. The view was breathtaking, the entire city spread out below us like a glittering circuit board. We sat in comfortable leather armchairs, the silence between us easy and unforced. He took a sip of his coffee and looked at me over the rim of the mug. You have good hands, he said. I blinked. What? For an artist, he clarified. When we were moving the crate, I noticed. You're careful. You understand balance and weight. He paused, his gray eyes searching my face. Forgive me if I'm overstepping, but you're not just a delivery man. Are you, Leo? The question hung in the air between us, as vast and open as the city skyline. It wasn't an accusation, it was an invitation. An invitation to be more than the uniform, more than the job. He was asking to see the person underneath. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I used to be, I admitted, my voice quiet. I was in art school. For sculpture. I had to drop out. Life got in the way. He nodded slowly, his expression full of a deep, compassionate understanding. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. He just listened. I'm sorry to hear that, he said simply. The world can be hard on artists. And then he did something that completely disarmed me. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze earnest and direct. I want you to know, he said, his voice low and serious, that I hope I didn't put you on the spot downstairs. By asking for your help in front of your colleagues, he paused, choosing his words with care. It's important to me that people feel they have a choice, especially in situations where there might be a perceived imbalance. He was talking about his wealth. He was talking about the power dynamic between us. He was naming the elephant in the room, the thing I had been so afraid of, and he was doing it with such grace and respect for my autonomy that it took my breath away. He was worried about being seen as coercive, as a rich man taking advantage. He was actively working to make me feel safe. A wave of emotion washed over me, relief, gratitude, and a powerful, undeniable surge of affection. This man, this quiet, steady pillar of a man, was not just seeing me. He was protecting me, even from himself. I did have a choice, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I wanted to help. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. He gave a small, slow nod. Good, he said softly. That's good to know. We finished our coffee in a comfortable silence, the earlier tension replaced by a new, fragile sense of intimacy. The shared task and his quiet admission had changed something between us. We had moved beyond polite lobby conversations. We had shared a moment of genuine human connection, high above the city, in his quiet sanctuary. As I left that day, after accepting the crisp $100 bill he insisted I take, I knew that the invisible line between our 2 worlds had not just been bent, it had been broken. And I had no idea what would come next. The next week was a strange kind of agony. I was caught between a desperate desire to see him and a paralyzing fear of what it would mean if I did. Our last conversation had been too real, too intimate. It had stripped away the safe, professional distance between us. Now, there was just potential. And potential was terrifying. I saw him only once that week, a brief crossing in the lobby. He was on his way out. I was on my way in. He smiled, a warm, private smile that was clearly just for me. Leo, he said, his voice a low murmur as he passed. My name on his lips was a caress. I could only manage a tight nod in return, my throat closing up. The sheer intensity of my reaction to him scared me. The tipping point came on a Friday. The weather had turned, and a biting, early autumn wind was whipping through the city streets. I was chilled to the bone, tired, and just wanted the day to be over. As I was loading the mail into the slots in the Vance Tower lobby, a resident I'd had trouble with before, a woman with a sour face and a perpetually yapping little dog, came up to me. You, she snapped, without preamble. You delivered a package for me yesterday, and the box was dented. Dented? Do you have any idea what was inside? Ma'am, I'm sorry to hear that. I began, using my practiced, placating tone. The boxes can sometimes get damaged in transit before they even get to me. Unacceptable, she cut me off, her voice rising. I pay a fortune to live in this building. and I expect a certain level of service. Not this carelessness. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disdain. You people are all the same. A hot flush of anger and humiliation washed over me. You people, the phrase hung in the air, ugly and dismissive. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, but no words came. What was the point? Arguing would only make it worse. Is there a problem here, Mr. Harris? Arthur's voice, calm and cold as steel, cut through the woman's tirade. He had come out of the elevator and was standing behind her, his face a mask of polite inquiry, but his eyes were like chips of ice. Mr. Harris, who had been hovering uselessly nearby, jumped. The woman whirled around. Mr. Vance. Yes. This delivery person damaged my property. Arthur's gaze flickered to me for a fraction of a second, a silent question. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He turned his full attention back to the woman. Leo is the most diligent and careful person on this building's staff, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable authority. I have seen him handle priceless artifacts with more care than most museum curators. If a box was dented, I am quite certain it did not happen in his hands. He took a small step forward. Now, if you have a complaint with the shipping company, I suggest you take it up with them. Do not, however, harass my staff. The words were a shield, a claim. The woman's face went pale, then mottled with red. She opened and closed her mouth a few times, then grabbed her dog's leash and stalked off without another word. The lobby was silent in her wake. Mr. Harris looked profoundly relieved. I just stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs. Arthur had defended me. He had stood up for me, publicly and unequivocally. He walked over to me, his expression softening as he got closer. Are you all right? He asked, his voice losing its icy edge and returning to its familiar warmth. I could only nod, my throat still tight. Thank you, I managed to whisper. There's nothing to thank me for, he said firmly. No one deserves to be spoken to that way. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze searching my face. Leo, I'm heading up. Would you come with me? For a moment. It wasn't a question about coffee or moving a box. It was something else entirely. It was a clear, deliberate invitation to step away from this public space and into his private one. It was a crossroads. Yes, I said, the word coming out on a breath of air. The elevator ride was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It was thick with unspoken things, with the aftermath of the confrontation in the lobby and the anticipation of what was to come. When we stepped into his apartment, he didn't stop in the entryway. He walked further in, toward the massive windows, and I followed him. He turned to face me, the late afternoon sun backlighting his frame. I apologize for her behavior, he said. And I apologize if my intervention made you uncomfortable. I didn't mean to overstep. You didn't, I said quickly. You helped. No one's ever done that for me before, then they should have, he said simply. He took a step closer, and my breath hitched. The space between us was shrinking, charged with a tension that was almost visible. Leo, he began, his voice dropping even lower. These last few weeks, our conversations, they've become very important to me. My heart was beating so loudly I was sure he could hear it. This is it. The moment where everything changes or everything falls apart. Me too, I whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and liberating. He searched my eyes, looking for something, permission, confirmation. I feel a connection to you, he said, the words careful and deliberate. One that I haven't felt in a very long time. But I am also acutely aware of our circumstances. My age, my position. I would never, ever want you to feel pressured or obligated in any way. He was giving me an out. Even now, in this moment of profound emotional risk, he was still prioritizing my safety, my choice. He was laying all his cards on the table, along with a clear and open escape route. And in that moment, all my fear dissolved, replaced by a wave of certainty so powerful it felt like coming home. This man wasn't a predator. He wasn't looking for a dependent. He was looking for a partner. And he was terrified of getting it wrong. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I initiated. I closed the final foot of distance between us. I stood before him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, and looked up into his steady, searching gray eyes. I think, I said, my voice shaking only slightly, that I feel something for you, Arthur. And it's confusing, and it scares me, but it's real. I saw something shift in his eyes, a profound, soul-deep relief. And it has nothing to do with this apartment, or your money, or your name. It has to do with you, with the way you listen, the way you see things. He raised a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a touch so tender it almost broke me. The rough, smooth texture of his skin against mine was electrifying. It isn't confusing to me, Leo, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. I feel it too. He swallowed, his gaze dropping to my lips. But I needed you to be sure. I needed you to choose this. I am choosing it, I breathed. I'm choosing you. That was all the permission he needed. He leaned down slowly, giving me every possible chance to turn away, to retreat. I didn't. I met him halfway, rising on my toes just as his lips met mine. The kiss was not a fiery explosion. It was a quiet revelation. It was soft and slow and breathtakingly gentle. It was a kiss of profound relief, a sigh of two lonely souls finally finding a safe harbor. It tasted of coffee and clean air and something that was just him. It was a question and an answer all at once, a confirmation of everything that had been building between us in whispered words and fleeting touches. When we finally broke apart, he didn't move away. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His hand was still on my face, his thumb still making slow, soothing circles on my cheek. I laced my fingers with his other hand, our palms pressing together. It felt right. It felt solid. A quiet foundation settling into place. Leo, he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. It wasn't a statement or a question. It was just my name, spoken with a reverence that made my heart ache with a sweet, unfamiliar joy. In the quiet of his apartment, with the city lights beginning to twinkle to life below us, I felt the rigid, straight lines of my life finally, beautifully, begin to curve. We stood like that for a long time, simply breathing together. The tension that had been a constant hum beneath the surface of my life for weeks had finally gone silent, replaced by a deep, resonant calm. It felt like the end of a long journey and the beginning of another, all at once. There were 1,000 things to figure out, 1,000 potential complications looming in the future, but in that moment, none of them mattered. All that mattered was the solid weight of his hand in mine and the steady beat of his heart so close to my own. He eventually drew back, though he didn't let go of my hand. He looked at me, his eyes soft and full of a gentle wonder. I had a whole speech prepared, he said, a small, self-deprecating smile on his lips. About taking things slowly, about not wanting to frighten you off. You don't have to worry about that, I said, my voice steadier now. You've done nothing but make me feel safe since the moment I met you. His smile widened. Good, he said. That was the general idea. He squeezed my hand. Stay? Have dinner with me. Not as a thank you, not as payment for services rendered. Just stay. I'd like that, I said, and the simple words felt like the truest thing I had ever said. He cooked. It was another surprise in a day full of them. He moved around his large, state-of-the-art kitchen with the same quiet competence he applied to everything else. He chopped vegetables with a focused precision, the rhythmic sound of the knife on the cutting board a soothing counterpoint to the soft jazz he put on the stereo. He handed me a glass of wine and set me to work tearing lettuce for a salad, and the simple, domestic act felt more intimate than the kiss. We were building something together, a meal, a moment. We ate at a small table near the windows, the city a carpet of glittering diamonds below. We talked for hours. I told him about my art, the heavy, abstract sculptures I used to make, how I missed the feel of clay and metal under my hands. He told me about his work, how he'd started as an architect with a vision for creating spaces that felt human, and how that vision had somehow snowballed into a real estate empire he sometimes found more bewildering than satisfying. He spoke of his late wife, who had died several years ago, and the profound loneliness that had followed. He was open and honest, sharing parts of himself that I knew he kept hidden from the world. And I, in turn, felt safe enough to do the same. When it got late, a new kind of anxiety began to creep in. The question of what came next. He must have sensed it, because he put his fork down and looked at me, his expression serious again. Leo, he said, I don't want you to feel any pressure about tonight. Or any other night. This is new for both of us. I want to build it on a foundation of trust, not expectation. Once again, he was anticipating my fears and gently dismantling them. The relief was so profound it was almost dizzying. "Okay," I said, my voice a little thick. "Thank you." He walked me to the door, and the goodbye was almost as chaste as our first meeting. He took both of my hands in his, raised one to his lips, and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. It wasn't a vague promise. It was a statement of fact. As I rode the elevator down, I felt like a completely different person than the man who had ridden it up a few hours earlier. The world hadn't changed, but my place in it had been fundamentally altered. I wasn't just a ghost in a blue uniform anymore. I was Leo, a man who had just shared dinner and a first kiss with Arthur Vance. The next morning, however, some of the old anxieties came rushing back. The bright light of day made the romance of the previous evening feel dreamlike and distant. As I put on my uniform, the familiar weight of it felt heavier than ever. What was I thinking? A billionaire and a mail carrier. It was the stuff of cheap novels, not real life. The disparity between our worlds seemed impossibly vast. When I saw him in his tailored suit in the lobby, would he look at me in my practical, worn-out work clothes and feel a pang of regret? My stomach was in knots all morning. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. He had said he would call, but the cynical part of my brain, the part that had kept me safe for so long, whispered that he wouldn't. That he'd wake up and realize what a ridiculous idea this all was. I was sorting mail at my first stop of the day when my phone finally rang. His name flashed on the screen. I fumbled with the phone, my heart pounding, and answered. "Leo." His voice was just as warm and steady over the phone as it was in person. "Hi." I managed, my own voice sounding breathless. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work," he said. "No, it's fine." There was a brief pause. "I just wanted to make sure last night was real," he said, his voice soft and laced with a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "And to ask if you're free for dinner again tonight." The relief was a physical thing, a wave that washed through me and left me weak in the knees. "Yes," I said, a smile breaking across my face. "Yes, I am good," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice too. "I'll make a reservation somewhere. Somewhere quiet, where we can talk." Our second date was a quiet Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street, the kind of place you would never find unless you knew it was there. It was a neutral ground, a public space, and I realized he had chosen it deliberately. He was showing me that this wasn't just about his world or my world. It was about us creating a new space together. It was over dinner that he addressed the practicalities, the things that had been worrying me all day. He did it with his usual directness and care. "I know there's a significant financial disparity between us, Leo," he said, looking at me steadily over our plates of pasta. "And I want to be very clear about something. I am interested in you, not in being a patron. Your independence, your art, your life, those things are yours. I will never try to control them or use my resources to create a dependency. My role, if you'll let it be, is to support you, not to save you." He was giving me the one thing I valued most, my agency. He was telling me that he saw me as an equal, despite the numbers in our respective bank accounts. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. The test of this new, fragile bond came a few days later. We had decided to have coffee in the cafe attached to the Vance Tower lobby. It was a small, public step. We were sitting at a table, talking about a new exhibit at the art museum, when the sour-faced woman with the little dog walked in. She saw us immediately. Her eyes widened, flicking from Arthur to me and back again. A slow, malicious smile spread across her face. She walked past our table, and I could hear her stage whisper to the barista, "Looks like the help is getting a promotion." I flinched, my whole body tensing. The familiar shame and anger coiled in my gut. I started to pull my hand back from where it was resting on the table, near Arthur's. But before I could, Arthur simply reached over, covered my hand with his, and laced our fingers together. He didn't look at the woman. He didn't acknowledge her comment at all. He just held my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles, and continued speaking as if nothing had happened. "And the artist's use of negative space is particularly brilliant," he said, his voice calm, and even, his eyes fixed on mine. "Don't you think?" It was a masterclass in quiet defiance. He hadn't caused a scene. He had simply, elegantly, refused to let her poison into our space. He had claimed me, publicly, with a simple, gentle touch. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could pull my hand away, validating her ugliness and my own fear. Or I could leave it there, accepting his claim and making one of my own. I tightened my grip on his hand. I met his calm, steady gaze. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I think it's brilliant," the woman huffed and left. And we just sat there, our hands linked on the table between us, a silent, solid unit. The bond between us had been tested, and it had held. In fact, it felt stronger than ever. We began to build a life, one quiet moment at a time. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was slow and deliberate and incredibly gentle. We moved at a pace that felt right for us, a pace dictated by mutual respect and a deep-seated need to get this right. He encouraged me to start sculpting again. He cleared out a spare room in his vast apartment, a room with perfect northern light, and told me it was mine to use whenever I wanted. It wasn't an order or a gift with strings attached. It was an opportunity, freely given. "The space is just sitting here," he'd said with a shrug. "It would be a shame for it to go to waste, so I started spending my evenings and weekends there." At first, it felt strange, working in such a pristine environment, so different from the dusty, chaotic student studio I was used to. But slowly, it began to feel like my own. I started with small things, simple forms in clay, just trying to get the feel of the material back in my hands. Arthur would never interrupt me while I worked, but sometimes I would look up and find him standing in the doorway, just watching, a soft, proud smile on his face. One Saturday, he gave me a key to his apartment. He didn't make a grand speech about it. He just pressed it into my palm as I was leaving. "So you don't have to wait for me to let you in," he said simply. "Come and go as you please. This is your space too now, Leo." The weight of that small piece of metal in my hand felt immense. It was a key to a penthouse, yes, but it was more than that. It was a key to a life I was choosing, a symbol of the trust and intimacy we were carefully building. It wasn't a cage, it was an open door. I didn't quit my job. Not right away. I needed to feel like I was standing on my own 2 feet. Arthur understood without me having to explain it, but he also helped me find a path back to my own life. He introduced me to a gallery owner he knew, a woman who looked at the photos of my old work and saw promise. She encouraged me to apply for a grant, and Arthur helped me with the application, not by writing it for me, but by sitting with me for hours, asking questions that helped me clarify my own artistic vision. Our intimacy grew in these quiet, domestic moments. Making breakfast together on a Sunday morning, his arm brushing mine as we reached for the coffee. Reading side by side in comfortable silence in his library, my feet propped up on his lap. Watching the sunset from his balcony, his arm wrapped securely around my shoulders, a silent shield against the evening chill. He taught me that wealth didn't have to be a barrier. It could be a tool to create safety, to provide opportunity, to build a beautiful life. But the foundation of that life wasn't money. It was care. It was the way he always listened, really listened, when I spoke. The way he remembered a passing comment I'd made about a book I wanted to read and had it waiting for me the next time I came over. The way he would gently massage my back after a long day on my route, his strong, capable hands easing away the familiar ache. One morning, I woke up in his bed, the early light filtering through the massive windows. He was still asleep, his face peaceful in repose. I watched the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest, the way a stray piece of silver hair fell across his forehead. A feeling of such profound gratitude and contentment washed over me that it almost hurt. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen. I put on a pot of coffee, the familiar ritual now a source of deep comfort. As the rich aroma filled the apartment, I looked out at the waking city. Not so long ago, I had looked at this same view and felt like an outsider, a ghost looking in at a world I could never be a part of. Now it felt like home. I felt a pair of strong arms wrap around me from behind, and a warm body press against my back. Arthur rested his chin on my shoulder, his morning stubble scratching gently against my neck. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. "Good morning," I said, leaning back into his embrace. We stood there for a long moment, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city. The ache in my back was gone, replaced by the steady warmth of his arms around me. The rigid, unforgiving lines of my old life had been replaced by the soft, strong circle of his embrace. I thought back to that rainy afternoon, to the tired, lonely man who had delivered a package to the wrong door. I thought of the startling warmth of a hand on my wrist, the gentle amusement in a pair of gray eyes, the simple, life-altering words. "You have the right address now." He had been right. I had been lost, wandering through a life that didn't fit, and he had opened a door, not just to a penthouse, but to a place where I was seen and valued and loved. A place where the difference in our ages and our bank accounts was just context, not the story itself. The story was about two people who found each other, who chose each other, and who were building a quiet, beautiful life, one steady, trusting day at a time. He tightened his arms around me and pressed a soft kiss to the side of my neck. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I smiled, turning my head to meet his gaze. "Just how glad I am that I'm a terrible navigator," he chuckled, a low, warm sound that vibrated through my whole body. "Me too, Leo," he said. "Me too." And as we stood there, watching the sunrise together, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally, truly, home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.